Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the 2021 World Cocoa Foundation Partnership Meeting. I'm Dr. Christy Leslie. I'm a scholar of the political economy of cocoa and chocolate and author of the book Cocoa on Sector Politics. I'm joining you today from Accra, Ghana, where I live, and I will be your host for the next 2 days. We have an exciting program in store for you, but first, let me say a few words about using our event platform. At any time, you can access your attendee guide through the Attendee Guide tab. If you need personalized live help, we have a help desk available for you, staffed by swap card experts who can help you out. Pour accéder à cette session en français, vous pouvez sélectionner français en haut à gauche de cet écran. The World Cocoa Foundation Partnership Meeting could not take place without the generous support of our sponsors, notably Platinum sponsor Mars Wrigley. Be sure to stop by the sponsor pages to learn more about each of them. Now, I'm sure you want to meet other attendees during these 2 days. For that, go to the Attendees tab where you can connect, send direct messages, and even schedule and hold one-to-one video meetings on the platform. We've also created sessions to connect in small groups, and these are the Meetup Sessions. Meetups will be hosted by Wendy Arenas, Carolyn Lubbers, Harold Pulma, Martin Short, and Asamoah Yapo. In these sessions, you will have an informal discussion with the speaker and get to meet with other attendees too. But for that, you do need to reserve a seat. You can do this by clicking Add to My Schedule for that Meetup session. Once you add the session to your schedule, you're all set to join that meetup. But attendance is limited, so do save your spot. I really encourage you to join these meetups. I'll be joining a meetup myself, and I look forward to the chance to engage with the meetup host. Remember, if you've added a meetup to your schedule, please do make sure to attend. If you find that you are unable to make it, please just unbook your seat so that another person can attend. Thank you. Now for our agenda for this opening plenary. We'll hear from WCF's new president, Martin Short, followed by Amber Johnson, Global Vice President of Cocoa from Mars Wrigley. After that, we will honor the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor with 3 important speeches. But for now, over to you, Martin.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, good afternoon. And in some places, good evening. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2021 World Cocoa Foundation Partnership Meeting. And I'd like to start by thanking those who've made this possible, our Platinum sponsor, Mars Wrigley, Gold sponsor, Mondelez, and of course, many others. This is my first partnership meeting as your president of the World Cocoa Foundation, and I look forward to robust and forthright solution-orientated discussions over the coming 2 days. On my desk here in Washington, D.C., I have 2 pictures, one of a cocoa farmer taken in 1959 and the other taken in 2021. Both show a farmer, machete in hand, no shoes on his feet, and cocoa pods littering the ground. The only difference between these 2 photographs is one is in color and the other is in black and white. We may now be living in the world of this color photograph, but the farmers remains unchanged from that black and white era. I would like to make 3 points for these 2 days. Firstly, poverty is at the core of this problem. It is the heart of child labor and deforestation. Secondarily, everything we discuss over these 2 days needs to focus on this core problem. And finally, all participants in the supply chain need to burden share and compromise, including sharing traceability protocols and data. Let me briefly speak to our 3 focus areas. Child labor. In this International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, we see the plight of families driven to engage in dangerous farming activities. All forms of child labor remain unacceptable, but we need to find solutions as to how this can be overcome and in tandem with gender inequalities. That is why we're devoting time to ensuring that we have a full debate on child labor. We need to define success not by reiterating the problem nor regurgitating historical data, nor the call for ever more research, often the domain of those who think data collection is the only benchmark by which progress and success can be measured. All stakeholders in any cash crop supply chain should feel ownership on child labour issues. We are all responsible, and no one can plead ignorance or abdicate responsibility. Just because child labour activities may fall outside your own perceived sphere of influence and control does not mean that you cannot add value and provide solutions for its eradication. And we all have shared accountability. I look forward to the opening plenary today with Arti Kapoor, Kim Frankovich, and Pablo Pavesi, and farmer technology testimony, as well as today's breakout session on child severity. I hope that these will truly be a catalyst for long-lasting and sustainable change. Much has been achieved already with significant increases in school attendance and child protection systems in both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, as well as significant gains in Indonesia and Ecuador. This progress must be applauded and should be expanded. But there are still far too many children in the supply chain for cocoa and other cash crops. We should also be candid and look at the root causes of why child labour has continued to plague the supply chain. At times, we seem to put both the blame and the responsibility for providing the solution for the eradication of child labour solely on the shoulders of the farmers. If only it were that simple and so easily assigned. We've also devoted considerable time to this partnership meeting for the second core focus, which is deforestation. Our flagship program, the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, has been groundbreaking in its top-down approach of bringing seemingly distant and maybe even ideologically differentiated parties together to act in coordination to achieve what is by any measure a very promising partnership. The accomplishment of the Cocoa and Forest Initiative has been no small part given by the efforts of Prince Charles, given that the real success here is not solely at the level of tree propagation, planting and capacity building, but also that so many disparate stakeholders came together to put aside their differences to ensure that the project itself took center stage rather than those who signed up to it. It is worth noting that Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have taken a significant leadership role in driving this through at the national level. In Colombia, we're seeing excellent progress with the Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative. And also the private sector has made significant commitments and has shown real ambition through multi-stakeholder partnerships. However, there is still much to do, and we all need to hold ourselves and others accountable on additionality. Are we adding new money that would not ordinarily have been spent if these initiatives were not in place? I leave it to all stakeholders to answer that question in reflective honesty. And lastly, as priorities change, issues come in and out of favour and bubble to the top of the agenda, we cannot afford to fund certain new shiny things in one section to the detriment of another. This leads me to comment on two aspects of CFI that amplifies its purpose. Partnerships, the very theme of this conference, overcoming challenges together. Partnerships by their very nature mean compromise and equality. Partnerships mean that to achieve the bigger goal, to reach the objectives of the alliance, private institutions, governments, and individuals will have to leave their egos and their silos at the door. That the 20% of what we all hold dear may well have to be sacrificed at the altar of compromise to attain the objective that we seek. Focus on the 80%. The second aspect of CFI that I want to highlight is that of systemic reform. I admit to being disheartened by the continued overuse of the word sustainability without any thought or regard to what mechanisms are required to be actioned to achieve this heavy goal. I would advance that we should think through things in the terms of 3 S's: scale, systemic reform, and then as an outcome, sustainability. And the third theme is farmer poverty. Poverty poisons everything. We have not made enough progress over child labour and indeed deforestation because we are advocating solutions through siloed interventions. These may provide instant gratification, but in reality, they're not robust enough to be indelibly stamped on the supply chain, as they do not embrace holistic methodologies. We also often encourage smaller bespoke projects that may be impactful in the moment, but will never be sustainable because they often address single institutional or development needs and fail to address the wider systemic ones. This is a classic case of undertaking activity and relabeling it as productivity. Let me tell you about my reading of some recent research. I was positively struck and initially heartened to see the research headline, "Poverty Drives Child Labour." I could not agree more. But on reading the material on these two projects in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, I would have liked them to go further than to point out the need for strengthening capacity, additional monitoring, increased accountability, and encourage pilots for cooperative cocoa traceability systems. We are seemingly happy to enforce, monitor, make accountable, certify, and trace to ensure that we eradicate child labour and deforestation. Laudable, but flawed, as this does not address the root cause, which is poverty. These traceability protocols we impose virtuously on the farmer are self-gratifying when it works, but never seems to fully incentivize or fully reward the farmer for these undertakings. Remember, you can change people's behavior by the way you compensate them. We will never move to attaining so-called sustainability if all we do is impose strict traceability protocols on the farmer and then piously advise them on how to spend their hard-earned poverty. So as we enter these 2 days of discussions and debate, I'd like you to ask the following. After every session, whether that be a breakout, a speech, a panel, please ask yourself just one thing. Can the solutions or thoughts or actions that we have been advancing today in this session meaningfully improve the income of the farmer? And if you cannot answer yes to that issue, then we have a problem. You cannot legislate for compassion. And I have to tell you that moral imperative and just because we should is so last century. We have to have a clearer roadmap of the how over the what. Simply restating objectives and displaying principled indignation combined with righteous hand-wringing won't cut it if we truly desire a step change. So I urge all participants to undertake a shared equity stake in the resolution to farmer income. That's a big call to action from me and will not be without compromise, and nor will it be without some discomfort. Not all farmers will make it in cash crop agriculture, and cocoa is no exception to this. If we believe in free market economics, that is part of the natural cycle and the growing pain. But to achieve equity and better farmer compensation, we have to encourage, strive for a healthy relationship between supply chain and demand side of the equation. We will have to use the vital tool of supply chain management to develop long-lasting and affecting pricing structures. That believing that the only solution to improve farmer income is that the consumer will pay more is not realistic. It infers that should the consumer not be willing to pay more, that in turn means farmer poverty is therefore acceptable. Well, it isn't. That in a world where we have a fluctuating relationship between supply and demand, we need to have the full compliance with and acceptance of a robust traceability protocol in addition to supply chain management. Bespoke traceability protocols rolled out by individual institutions is frankly not a long-term solution. And we have to embrace that as far as traceability is concerned, one size must fit all stakeholders. That we need a legislated level playing field that can be rolled out and be enforced by regulators both in origin countries and externally. And the single most important step change that we have to embrace is the repositioning of contribution over attribution. We all need to play our part for the wider improvement of the system and not always believe that the actions that we take should only be attributed to an individual or institutional action. Just imagine what we could achieve if we had one traceability protocol fully embraced by all stakeholders in the full supply chain that drove a meaningful and substantial farm gate price differential between the price of traceable cocoa and non-traceable cocoa. But this is a marathon and not a sprint. We will all need to identify what role we will be playing and sacrifice we're willing to embrace for the greater good. Where we all have to accept that the private sector has the right to make a profit, and where governments have a right over the sovereignty of actions in their own domestic market. That land rights and rule of law provided by government nurture an enabling environment that allows for the creation of jobs, which is the role and the business of the private sector, not the role of government. Of course, partnerships between private sector and public sectors are critical, but all stakeholders must put aside their differences and focus on the 80% that unites their aims. I'm looking again at the photograph on my desk, one taken in 1959 and the other in 2021, one in black and white and the other in color. When we talk about the real progress that we've made in the 60 years between those two photographs being taken, put my finger on, is that we are still here talking about the difficult life. Anyway, over the coming 2 days, look, I look forward to having a fantastic discussion with you guys, and I'll be popping in and out of the sessions, and I look forward to some robust and challenging, edgy conversations. So thank you for listening to me. I'd like now to hand over to Amber Johnson, Global Vice President of Cocoa at our Platinum sponsor, Mars Wrigley. Amber, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today and welcome you to the World Cocoa Foundation 2021 Partnership Meeting. I am Amber Johnson, and I have the privilege of leading the cocoa enterprise at Mars Wrigley. While I might be a new face to many of you, Mars Wrigley is not. As one of the largest snacking companies in the world, cocoa is integral to bringing millions of smiles to consumers who enjoy our products, such as M&M's, Galaxy, Snickers, Mars Bar, and more. As a private, purpose-led, family-owned company, we're holding ourselves to account for more than financial performance. We place equal value on delivering quality growth, being a trusted partner, and ensuring that we're making a positive impact for everyone in our value chain. In fact, we're so serious about this that our senior executives' incentives are weighted on as much on positive societal impact as they are on financial performance. By focusing each day on creating better moments and more smiles at Mars Wrigley, we pave the way towards our long-term ambition to build a more inclusive, modern, and sustainable cocoa supply chain. I'd also like to thank the World Cocoa Foundation for continuing to organize this important annual opportunity for us to come together and drive a collective agenda within the cocoa sector. Martin and his team could not have chosen a more apropos theme for this year's conference, Overcoming Challenges Together. As we convene today, still grappling with the effects of COVID-19 and fresh off the tails of COP26, cocoa continues to find itself in a similar red alert situation. We continue to live in an era of disruption, and we can expect this to become more of the norm going forward. As we all know, the challenges we face as a cocoa industry are vast, from poverty to child labor to deforestation, pest and disease, and climate change. Cocoa communities continue to face a never-ending series of challenges. Cycle of poverty and income inequality, and the fact that we haven't made more progress on these is simply unacceptable. COVID-19 has exacerbated these vulnerabilities and has impacted cocoa farming communities across the globe in unprecedented ways, disrupting both supply chains and consumer demand. In some regard, COVID-19 has sent farmers backwards, and now we are faced with an even more challenging new normal than pre-COVID. This is the backdrop that frames our conversations this week. As we sit here today, we're far removed from the conversations on if we should act. Over the last decades, the what has become clearer too. The Wcf Strategic Pillars summarize very well where we all want to get to: prosperous farmers, healthy planet, and empowered communities. In fact, each of our individual programs and approaches, whether from industry, government, or civic organization programs, include efforts that deliver along these lines. Activities such as agricultural improvements, business training for farmers, support for children to receive a quality education, women's empowerment efforts, and many more. But the real challenge now is how we move forward. Progress and impact at the scale that is needed to see significant and meaningful change, like farmers moving out of extreme poverty. And it will only ever happen if we combine our collective expertise and step up our efforts. Together, as a whole sector, we must find transformational, holistic, and collaborative solutions to the multiple issues we must address in the cocoa sector for it to be sustainable. We must go beyond incremental individual innovation and lean in to tackle the biggest problems at their root. In order to partner on a different level, we must start by speaking with one voice. And a first step is to listen to one another from all voices, not just a select few. This must begin with a clear understanding of the origin government's strategic plans, which we as an industry can then build upon and bolster versus creating our own. I want to emphasize this point. Collectively, we have been guilty of trying to sell our plans to the origin governments versus listening to them and building upon their plans. It is with this shift that we can create an environment through which infrastructure, agribusinesses, and financial investment are attracted to the sector as a result of the uncommon collaboration that is exhibited. We must look beyond individual supply chain approaches and turn toward approaches which enable farmer professionalism and build resiliency. These approaches need to be built together and include those that are most impacted by our actions, farming families and their communities. We should support legislation in consumer countries which stipulate robust mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence to ensure that everyone plays their part, small, medium, and large actors, all playing by the same rules. This then creates a level playing field for companies to be able to confidently work on sustainability issues without creating a first mover disadvantage. We all have a role in creating this transformational change. Sharing our experience of what we believe works and what doesn't can be a catalyst to encourage others to work with us and drive change that can improve lives for cocoa farmers and communities. Now we have an opportunity to do better, go faster, recover stronger, and fairer. It's not just about returning to business as usual. We must define a new normal, one where we enable cocoa communities to not just weather future shocks and disruptions, but to stand strong and be resilient. At Mars, we believe that the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today, and we must work together as an industry to solve the complex challenges facing cocoa as quickly as possible. My hope for each of us is that we walk away from these next 2 days having listened to one another, heard from some new voices, and have a better understanding of how we can pragmatically come together. I strongly believe a different future is possible for the entire cocoa sector, and especially cocoa farmers, where they can prosper, are empowered, and have the resources and support they need to keep the planet healthy. However, that future is not inevitable. We need to continue working hard and strategically together if we are to create a thriving and sustainable cocoa sector. So let's start this chapter now. I encourage you, as you're going through each session, to identify someone new to engage who can be a thought partner, a potential collaborator, or an amplifier to the collective progress that we are all making. Bettering the future of cocoa calls for all of us to work differently, and the future of cocoa is dependent upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you again, Martin, as well. And once again, we apologize for the slight technical difficulty. Please be aware that a recording of Martin's speech in its entirety will be available on the website, as will the entirety of the program. So anything that you missed, you will be able to view it again on the website, on the platform rather. So as you know, COP26 has just concluded in Glasgow, and I'm sure we're all very eager to hear about what this means for cocoa. So it is my pleasure to introduce Justin Adams, Executive Director of the Tropical Forest Alliance, who will be speaking on what COP26 means for cocoa. Justin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you all for organizing this great session, inviting me to come and just give you a few quick words about what was really a very momentous 2 weeks with the climate summit in Glasgow that has just finished, as I'm sure you're all aware. So I'm going to just touch on 3 points. I'm going to touch on the overall kind of summit and what are some key outcomes. Secondly, what are the implications for, or what were some of the big announcements for forests and for supply chains for commodities, including cocoa? And thirdly, what might some of that mean in terms of implications as we look forward, particularly to the next COP in Egypt in 12 months' time? And so I do that both as in my role as the head of the TFA, but also as a friend of COP, advising the COP president. And so as I reflect on what has occurred, I think there's two ways I can frame the overall outcomes. The sort of glass half full approach is that we have achieved real momentum, and I think the UK deserves real credit for putting on a vast summit that had 40,000 delegates, let alone the tens of thousands of protesters outside during the pandemic, and delegates from all over the world. It was incredibly important because I think what it really showed was the solidarity that despite COVID and despite the broader fragmentation in our geopolitics globally, that this is an agenda that brings people together because we all recognize that this is a critical priority for the planet. And there was a real palpable sense of how much urgency there was given the latest science. There was also real progress in some of the technical work, such as the Paris rulebook, and something I think really important as a mechanism that says that every 12 months, things will be reviewed. Countries have to come forward with their plans every 12 months. And then there was real momentum from non-state actors, from private sector companies, civil society, academia, that I think was also unprecedented. A group called the High Level Champions that are connected to the UN process mobilized now more than 8,000 signatories of what is called Race to Zero. This is companies and other organizations pledging of how they can achieve really substantial progress and start to work towards a 1.5 degree future. So that was the sort of positive of what came out of Glasgow. Lots of momentum and a sense that this is public or governments and business and civil society working together. But it's also important to recognize there are still enormous challenges ahead. We haven't gone nearly far enough. The latest estimates are that the pledges that were made, the government commitments that were made, put us on track not to a 1.5 degree future, but to a 2.4 degree future. So still improvements of where we were in Paris, but still a long way to go in terms of the climate target. And the other thing I think is really important to recognize is we have failed, particularly in the developed countries, to mobilize the level of climate finance that is going to be necessary for the transition. And I think so many countries in the global south have been really pushing to say this is critical for us. We need adaptation finance. We need finance to support the transition of our economies. And that, I think, is going to be the critical stumbling block as we move forward, and really what we need to be pushing on to the future. I also think the divide between the inside and the outside of COP was greater than ever. But what I would say is one other bright spot, the recognition that this is a social agenda, And I note you're talking today on child poverty. I note that I couldn't agree more with Martin's observation that poverty sits behind so much of what we see with deforestation, that unless we put people at the center of these transitions, we will fail. That was recognized, but I think, again, there's far too much talk and not nearly enough action in terms of how are we supporting a just transition if climate is going to be a critical North Star for us in the future. The second thing then is to talk about the land use agenda. And I think there has never been an international summit where the role of nature, the role of our forests, the role of other critical ecosystems, and by implication, the role of the food sector, of which cocoa is clearly a critical part, has never been more prominent. And what we saw, particularly at the beginning of the summit, was a really strong commitment from world leaders that they were going to act on forests, on conserving forests, on restoring forests, supporting the livelihoods of people. And what we saw there was more than 140 countries now committing to work together to reverse forest loss by 2030. We saw significant new financial commitments. And importantly, I think for the cocoa sector, some very specific focus on the Congo Basin, significant focus for indigenous and other forest-dependent communities, the multilateral banks stepping up and recognizing this is something they needed to do. And then new commitments from private sector as well, coming together to commit to how they can support the transition, including this new jurisdictional coalition, the so-called LEAF coalition, which has now announced more than $1 billion of public-private finance to support that transition. And Ghana is one of 5 countries or 5 jurisdictions that has been approved into their pipeline. There was also this discussion called the FACT Dialogue, which UK and Indonesia co-chaired, which really talked about partnership between the North and the South, working together on trade, on smallholders, on traceability. So critical issues that you're going to be discussing over these 2 days. And lastly, I think we saw private sector engaged in a really substantial way beyond what we've seen before. The finance community committing, or many investors committing to take deforestation out of their portfolios, many traders across multiple commodities committing to work together on a 1.5-degree roadmap. So again, real momentum for the forest and the commodity agenda. So what does that mean as we look forward? As I said at the beginning, Egypt is the next COP, and Africa COP is crucial at this time. It couldn't be coming at a better time, and clearly very important for the cocoa agenda as well. But I think we will see real focus on justice, on equity, on adaptation, and many of the issues that were unresolved in Glasgow will need to be taken forward to Sharm el-Sheikh in 12 months' time for resolution. And we've already heard the Egyptian presidency talk about the role of nature-based solutions, talk about the food agenda becoming more prominent for that COP. And as I've already said, I think the Congo Basin recognized as a critical part of the global ecosystems that need more focus. And again, how do we ensure production, so cocoa production in the Congo Basin, whilst ensuring the preservation of the forests and the support to people? More and more, it's going to be about the integration of this environment agenda and social agenda. And so as I look to the future, and as I look to kind of where Glasgow has left us, I'm actually incredibly hopeful. I think there has been real progress, but like Martin, I can't trace back to 1959, but over my 50 years, I have seen precious little progress in terms of so many of these agenda items, but it is going to now take real partnership if we're going to move that forward. So the food, the forest, the land use agenda has never featured more prominently. That creates a great opportunity, but I think there's 5 things that we're going to need more of as we move forward. And I'd ask you to think about those over your 2-day summit. So one is that we need more action. We need to take great words that will be talked about here, we're talked about everywhere. We need to turn words into action and real implementation. We need more transparency, and I couldn't agree more. We need more consistent or unified transparency in terms of the systems different countries are using, different companies are using, and that's part of what I hope can come forward with the FACT dialogue. And I will call out Ghana's leadership in that discussion. Ghana has played a really leading role. Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Colombia, also involved, but great progress there. We need more inclusion. We are not hearing enough from voices from the South. We are not hearing enough from female voices. We're not hearing enough from indigenous voices or from farmers' voices in terms of the transition that are needed. And at the heart of it will be partnership. It's really hard to do, as we know, but we need more partnership. CFI doing great, but let's get more partnership between the countries. How do other countries come into the CFI role? How do we make links between the ISCOs on the consumer side and the producer partnerships around how we're going to make progress overall? So partnership, I think, is critical. Nobody on their own can make it happen. We have to figure out how we work together in different ways, and that's crucial overall. And then we need more finance. We are seeing unprecedented levels of finance, as I've already highlighted. We're seeing carbon finance as a new source of funding. It's going to have to start coming together in innovative ways. It doesn't fall on one supply chain actor. It doesn't fall on one government, but thinking about how we mobilize that finance together is going to be crucial to see the real progress in the cocoa sector and across the land use sector more broadly. So great opportunities, but also significant challenges ahead. Let's not kid ourselves, but we will only do it by working together. Collective action now is key.
Thank you very much, Justin. And I want to thank Martin earlier for highlighting for us that this is the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. We wanted to honor this International Year with an insightful segment on the elimination of child labor. So we will begin with a global leader on this topic, Arti Kapoor, who is Executive Director of Embode. After Arti's video, we will hear from Minister Adama Kamara, in charge of employment and social protection in Cote d'Ivoire. So Arti, over to you.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure to be giving this keynote address at the 2021 WCF Partnerships meeting. I've been asked to speak on the subject of child labor, an important subject for me, one that I've dedicated a lot of my time, focus, and energy on in my work. And the questions are, why aren't we there yet? And what next? In terms of the situation, I think suffice to say, we can all agree that we're nowhere near where we should have been by now in terms of eradicating child labor from the cocoa sector and cocoa supply chains. And this is causing ongoing consternation and hand-wringing about what we should be doing and what we haven't been doing right. I think the situation is pretty grave. And I think in order to understand why we're not there yet, there's two things I think that we need to do. First of all, we need to step out. Let's look at the global picture for a moment. According to UNICEF and ILO's latest study, there are an estimated 8.5 million additional children in child labor since 4 years ago, when the last study was conducted. And in sub-Saharan Africa alone, we're seeing 16.6 million more children in child labor than the last time the study was done 4 years ago. I can go into further details, but for example, some of the details are that the agricultural sector sees the highest number of child labor, the highest incidences of child labor, including hazardous child labor. The types of work that children are engaged in are from manufacturing, domestic work, mining, to agriculture as well. So what are the causes? The causes are increasing poverty, increasing vulnerability, an inadequate lack of social programs and social safety nets. So when we're looking at this global picture, why do we think that cocoa would be any different? Why do we think that we would be able to eradicate child labor from cocoa without actually looking at the ocean in which child labor is taking place, thinking that the part of the ocean that includes cocoa is something that we can look at in isolation. We simply can't. Which brings us to the next step, which is that we need to step in. We've been taking a cocoa-centric, cocoa supply chain-driven approach to child labor, but that's not going to solve the issue because the issue requires a child-centered approach. From the point of view of a young boy or a young girl, does it really make that much of a difference if you're working in a cotton field, in a cocoa farm, in a factory, or in domestic work? Is the load any lighter? Is 20 kilos or 10 kilos any lighter if it's water or if it's cocoa? The point is that from the perspective of a child, the world looks very different from when you're looking at cocoa crops in particular, or another crop as an example. So what we really need to do is start by looking at children and what actually children need in order to be well enough and to reduce their risks of falling into child labor. And this is actually fundamental about what next. What next is something that I have been talking about for the last 5 or 6 years, is that we need to start measuring child well-being outcomes rather than only focusing so much of our time and energy, millions of dollars, on measuring incidences of child labor, like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and then trying to remediate those cases. Why aren't we spending our time, energy, and money on actually measuring correlating indicators, enabling children to be safer, enabling children, to be in school and to have a conducive upbringing for their potential? Why aren't we supporting vulnerable families so that they aren't reliant on their children to go out and work and help to earn income? So these are the kinds of things that we should be focusing on. We need to start taking a much more child-centered approach to child labor, not a cocoa supply chain-driven approach. Now, what that means is that we all need to come to an agreement about what those indicators need to be, what those indicators are that need to be measured and improved, such as better access to education. That would be measuring access. Quality of education. That would be measuring quality of education, not access to education. Gender equality, how men and women are treated differently, or how they actually have different situations, risks, and difficulties and challenges. Women's empowerment, which is different from gender equality, about empowering women so that they can actually take better care of their children and their families. Basic access to clean water, electricity, and other basic amenities. These are fundamental. How can we be going into communities trying to measure incidences of child labor when we look around and the community doesn't even have access to clean water, which is less than an hour's walk away, or electricity, or a road, or transportation? These are fundamental needs that families and communities need in order to be well, in order to be doing well, and also to be able to take better care of their children. So we need some agreement about these. And lastly, and there's a lot more to say, but lastly for the keynote address, we need to start taking a developmental approach to our due diligence approaches. Of course, companies are responsible for due diligence, making sure that your supply chains, that your operations are free from risks of human rights violations. But how do you do that? Do you go into communities and support and strengthen existing systems of child protection that can identify and monitor cases of child labor? Or are we building parallel systems? I think we need to start looking at what we're investing in and start taking a much more long-term vision. We need to build systems and mechanisms in countries. We need to support the strengthening of governance mechanisms, but we definitely shouldn't be building parallel systems which aren't sustainable in the long run and could in fact disable those very governance structures from developing any further, leaving us in the same situation we are in 10, 20 years ago. These countries and local communities are developing. We just need to move alongside them. So this is just my 2 pence worth. I'm looking forward to engaging further in conversations with everybody. I wish everybody a fruitful conference, and thank you very much for your attention.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, depuis plus d'une décennie, notre pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, est confronté à la question du travail des enfants. Les conclusions des dernières études indiquent que la pauvreté des ménages en constitue la principale cause. Pour y remédier, le gouvernement ivoirien a pris un ensemble de mesures et met en œuvre des programmes et projets avec l'appui de ses partenaires. Les efforts du gouvernement ivoirien se sont matérialisés d'abord par la volonté politique affirmée de son Excellence, M. Alassane Ouattara, président de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, qui a érigé la lutte contre le travail des enfants au rang des priorités de l'action gouvernementale. Aussi, l'a-t-il inscrit au programme national de développement. À cela s'ajoute l'implication de tout le gouvernement, conduit par le Premier ministre, M. Jérôme Patrick Achi, dans la mise en œuvre de la politique nationale de lutte contre le travail des enfants, à travers la création d'un comité interministériel qui regroupe l'ensemble des ministères techniques qui développent des programmes et projets en la matière. Le comité interministériel a été créé par décret du président de la République le 3 novembre 2011. En son article 2, le dit décret dispose que le comité interministériel de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants a pour mission de concevoir, de coordonner et d'assurer la mise en œuvre des programmes et projets en vue de l'interdiction du travail des enfants. À ce titre, il est chargé de définir et de veiller à l'application des orientations du gouvernement dans le cadre de la politique nationale de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants. Valider les différents programmes et projets exécutés par les partenaires en vue de vérifier leur conformité avec la politique nationale de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants. Coordonner les activités de tous les acteurs intervenant dans la lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants. Évaluer l'exécution des programmes et des projets relatifs à la lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants. Le pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, a opté pour des stratégies ciblées dont la réalisation se fait dans un cadre légal, réglementaire, institutionnel, conçu pour favoriser la synergie d'action, l'optimisation des moyens disponibles et la mobilisation de tous les acteurs du secteur public et parapublic, du secteur privé, de la société civile, des partenaires techniques et financiers, des agences du système des Nations Unies et des organisations non gouvernementales. Cependant, en dépit de l'existence du comité interministériel, il convient de relever que de nombreuses structures réalisent leurs actions dans le domaine de la lutte contre le travail des enfants de façon éparse, sans aucune synergie. Cette façon de procéder n'est ni efficace, ni constructive et ne permet pas d'assurer un minimum de cohérence avec la vision et les politiques nationales et surtout d'améliorer le suivi et l'évaluation de l'impact des différents projets réalisés. Face à de telles déperditions, il conviendrait de mettre en place un système d'accréditation des acteurs intervenant dans la lutte contre le travail des enfants qui obligerait chacun à se rapprocher du comité interministériel qui est l'organe chargé de coordonner de façon opérationnelle toutes les initiatives dans ce domaine. Cela nécessite de doter le comité interministériel et son secrétariat exécutif, outils opérationnels, de moyens appropriés pour assurer en continu ce rôle de coordination. Dans notre pays, la lutte contre le travail des enfants est conçue autour d'une stratégie qui s'articule autour de 3 principaux piliers, à savoir 1. La prévention du phénomène. 2. La protection des victimes. Et 3. La poursuite et la répression des auteurs. Pour opérationnaliser cette stratégie, l'État ivoirien, depuis 2012, a adopté successivement 3 plans d'action nationaux. Il s'agit des plans d'action nationaux 2012-2014, dotés d'un montant de 13 milliards 700 millions de francs CFA, 2015-2017, 13 milliards de francs CFA, et 2020-2021, 2019-2021, 76 milliards de francs CFA, soit un total de 102 milliards 700 millions de francs CFA sur 9 ans. À travers ce dernier plan d'action, qui d'ailleurs a été reconduit jusqu'en 2023, la Côte d'Ivoire ambitionne d'intensifier ses efforts en s'attaquant aux causes profondes du travail des enfants et en relevant les nouveaux défis tels que la traçabilité de la chaîne d'approvisionnement du cacao, l'extension des mécanismes de protection sociale aux agriculteurs et la lutte contre la déforestation. À cet effet, l'accent est mis sur 1. L'extension du système d'observation et de suivi du travail des enfants, en abrégé SOSTECI. 2. Le renforcement des capacités des inspecteurs du travail pour lutter efficacement contre le travail dans tous les domaines d'activité économique, y compris le secteur informel. 3. Et plus particulièrement, sur le renforcement de la protection sociale des agriculteurs, notre ambition est de permettre aux agriculteurs de bénéficier de la couverture maladie universelle qui ne coûte que 1 000 francs CFA par mois et du régime social des travailleurs indépendants, 5 400 francs CFA par mois, en vue d'apporter des solutions structurelles durables à la problématique du travail des enfants. Le processus permettra à terme à plus de 5 millions de paysans de se voir soigner correctement et de contribuer et de constituer une épargne à consommation différée sécurisée, dont ils pourront jouir en cas de suspension d'activité ou à la retraite, et pour le cas spécifique des femmes agricultrices en grossesse, de revenus durant leur période de maternité pendant environ 3 mois. Réaliser cette ambition, qui est d'ordre éthique, doit être un impératif catégorique à atteindre. L'élaboration du livre blanc assorti d'une stratégie nationale pour une cacaoculture durable en Côte d'Ivoire, afin de lutter contre le travail des enfants et la déforestation et améliorer les revenus des producteurs dans sa chaîne d'approvisionnement du cacao, la Côte d'Ivoire s'est dotée d'un document de référence intitulé Livre blanc qui présente la stratégie nationale de l'État, les défis, les besoins et les perspectives dans les domaines de la lutte contre le travail des enfants. La lutte contre la déforestation du couvert forestier ivoirien et l'amélioration des revenus des producteurs de cacao. Cette stratégie est estimée à 517 milliards 626 millions de francs CFA. Au regard de toutes ces actions, nous pouvons dire avec fierté que notre pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, avance dans la bonne direction. Il nous revient cependant d'œuvrer ensemble pour amplifier notre impact dans la lutte contre ce fléau inacceptable. Et je voudrais inviter à cet effet l'ensemble des chocolatiers, des exportateurs, à nous aider à faire de l'extension de la protection sociale aux agriculteurs une réalité. Ceci nous permettra d'améliorer la quantité de cacao certifié et de rassurer légitimement les consommateurs européens soucieux, à juste titre, de consommer un cacao dont le processus de fabrication se fait sans le travail des enfants. Pour sa part, le gouvernement entend poursuivre ses actions en collaboration avec tous les acteurs en vue d'éliminer progressivement le travail des enfants. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, and thank you very much to Arti Kapoor and Minister Kamara for these important messages. Now, we all want to know what is happening across the cocoa sector and how we will address this difficult issue together. We have Pablo Perversi, Chief Innovation, Sustainability, and Quality Officer at Barry Callebaut, and Kim Frankovich, Vice President, Cocoa Sustainability, Mars Wrigley, who will now talk us through the sector's approach for the coming months. Pablo and Kim, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Ministre, merci pour votre discours. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce who we are and what is Empowered Communities. Kim and I are the champions of the Empowered Communities pillar at WCF, as the strategy was set. And as Amber mentioned, there are three areas of focus, the others being healthy planet and prosperous farmers. They were adopted by WCF members to help us focus our efforts on collectively achieving the WCF vision, a thriving and sustainable cocoa sector where farmers prosper, communities are empowered, and the planet is healthy. So how do we in WCF define empowered communities? It means communities that lead their own development, human rights are protected, and safety and well-being of children and families are strengthened. A lot to unpack there, and many avenues for collective and individual actors in all the sectors. Lots of ideas, opinions, work underway, and a strong emotion around each of these areas, and in particular, children working on farms in unsafe conditions, or what is called child labor. Lots of commitments, lots of efforts, and yet I can safely speak for all of us that not enough has been done, and we are all frustrated by the progress that we see. Frustration not only in cocoa supply chain, but in many others, such that the United Nations deemed 2021 as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor and a theme of this meeting. So you may ask, why did Kim and I sign up to be a champion of this pillar earlier this year? Beyond our personal and professional passion for sustainability, we took on this role to do a few things. We want to champion internal and external learning, knowledge sharing amongst its members, communication of all activities in the pillar, work with Wcf, who leads the WCF efforts in this area, and provide strategic input into the activities we in WCF would collectively advance. Our first order of business has been to situate ourselves and actually listen, hear from others. We began with what we called the listening tour. Quite a challenging endeavor while travel restrictions continued due to COVID pandemic. We were fortunate to have Mil Neopold from the Mara Partners to lead this listening work on our behalf. It was important. We had a trusted, impartial person with lots of experience, a person that could conduct a series of confidential interviews with a broad set of stakeholders and I stress confidential, as neither Kim or I have visibility to who said what. We wanted a safe space for people to feel comfortable sharing their frustrations, their observations, and also the opportunities for us to achieve more swiftly together commitments around child labor, child welfare, and child protection. For this, we agreed on a number of principles as champions to guide our work together. We want to be the champions of the community. At the same time, the voice towards the board of WCF, building trust and engagement, and both leading and leaning into uncomfortable conversations, but listen for understanding and consensus building with a much broader engagement, with a focus on root causes. And let me say that when we focus on root causes, there's great inspiration to be had from a lot of great success cases, some of which can be seen in Indonesia or Brazil. With that, let me pass on to Kim, who will continue to take you through some of what we do.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So Pablo touched upon our principles, and the next thing we did as part of this listening tour was to really build the list of stakeholders. Many of you in the audience fed into that list, a broad list from civil society, academia, different actors in the cocoa supply chain, farmer representatives, family representatives, government representatives, and also new voices. We've spoken, many of you have spoken to Mill, and we thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts and opinions. We had a long list. We were hoping to have it completed by this meeting, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we still have a few more voices to hear from, and they're critical voices. It's been a challenging year with everybody's schedules changeover, and we wanted to make sure we gave some additional space and time for those to complete their interviews. We're happy to report those remaining interviews are scheduled into December. And if you haven't yet confirmed, please reach out to Mill during this meeting or after this meeting so we can get you scheduled and in the diaries. After we conclude this listening tour, we'll be diving into the outputs. And in 2022, taking what we heard and re-engaging with participants and the broader cocoa community. This next phase then will be more about our development phase on how we come together based on what we heard to step change our collective action. And I think on this panel, you've heard a number of voices and challenges and critiques that will also form a basis of our work going forward. The intent is to ensure that this generation and future generations are talking about how we ended child labor in the cocoa supply chain. I'd like to conclude with just a few comments around what it means to listen, to be heard, to be asked your opinion, and to have a voice at the table. Good listening skills, in my experience, are not a given, and they must be continually refined and practiced. We tend to listen for an opportunity to interject, to disagree, to affirm, and to share our own ideas. That's not what this listening tour for empowered communities was about. Our goal has been about listening for understanding from you and the stakeholders that have participated, for a connection, and to provoke new ways of working where we have a broad set of people around the table from the beginning, inputting in, engaging, and working through constructive dialogue. We all know, and we've heard from the rest, that this is not going to be easy, and it hasn't been easy. But we're focused on dialogue that brings about action so that we can deliver our shared vision of empowered communities. So more will come from Pablo and I in 2022, and all of you as well. You are a part of this process with us, with Pablo and I. So please, I encourage you, you've heard this on the panel, to take the next 2 days to hear from some new voices, to gain new understandings, new perspectives, and also connect with each other. We've built in time to have those connection points. I know it can be hard during our morning here in the US or across evening and late afternoon for others, but really take the time to connect and take us on to this next phase of our journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Pablo and to Kim. This concludes our opening plenary. We look forward to seeing you in our next session, Can All Cocoa Farmers Earn a Living Income? Thank you very much again to everyone, and we'll see you shortly.